back in the day, even volunteering for the ACLU in New York City and being like, I like this organization, I like these people, they stand up for free speech no matter who it is, and they're fighting for individuals' liberties against the government. And literally, I remember meeting with them, I remember spending my time as a teenager being like, these are the good guys doing something that's right. And now, I mean,
we know
so
exactly what had happened.
I'm so disappointed.
What happened was Donald Trump announced there was going to be a moratorium on travel from seven nations, and the ACLU all of a sudden saw a massive spike in donations. They were suing Donald Trump. So the left rallied around the ACLU. And then the ACLU defended the right of these alt-right individuals in Charlottesville, the right to hold their event. And the left went, how dare you, and started leaving the ACLU in droves. So the ACLU said, hold on a minute, guys. Should we uphold our principles or take money? And they took that sweet money because they didn't want to offend all those new donors who were pumping in those bucks. So now they've gone from the American Civil Liberties Union to the Anti-Civil Liberties Union, literally advocating for censoring speech. That's the opposite of civil liberties. Amazing.
The ACLU that you were talking about in your past, they got canceled.
Yeah, canceled and converted.
Yeah,
I'm
not happy about that.
It's infiltrate, destroy, rebuild. These woke cultists kick the door in, slowly start taking positions of power, and then once the woke mob on the outside cancels them, then the woke people inside say, "See, here's what we have to do. It's what people want.
When you say
we got to do it."
Canceled, were they like, did people resign?
No, it's that political pressure. They can't look. There was, you may recall, no one was really around back then, but there was American Nazi Party, and they would want to have a parade every year somewhere, and locals would say, we don't really want that in our neighborhood, but then the ACLU would show up and say, hey, they have a right to political speech, we're going to defend it. That takes a certain level of courage and fortitude. That integrity from law students through law schools to practice is gone. Everybody is terrified of not conforming to what is popular at the moment, and that the idea of somebody rebelling or standing up in opposition to what the masses or the woke mob thinks, it's pretty much disappeared on the left. It kind of disappeared, I think, with Justice Kennedy, because he was kind of the leader of that. And
the problem is, look, I get it. Collectivists are going to be collectivists. The problem is there's no counter to this. The Republican Party is basically the, old dotard sitting in a rocking chair saying, now hold on there, mister. And that's all they do. There's very few, I should say. There are a lot of people that are speaking out against this. There's intellectual dark web types. There's there are some leftists who are anti-woke. But for the most part, there's zero opposition. And what you have is a bunch of losers who, I love it, when people I know, even some of my friends, I'm very disappointed in them, will be like, I just can't stand all this cancel culture stuff and this weird these weird ideologies they're pushing. And I'm like, oh, have you tried speaking up against it? Oh no, not me. I couldn't do that. Well, then shut up and don't complain.
Preemptively canceled themselves because of optics. They don't want to look bad.
This is
well, you can do for those people they'll drive them nuts is bring back that old metaphor and say, well, first they came for Alex Jones and you didn't say anything.
But they don't care.
But they love that metaphor.
I've got a bunch of friends who are regular people, and they're just terrified and spineless.
That's pathetic, and it's the definition of pathetic. When you care what other people think about you, when you care what the audience thinks.
It's not that they care what people think about them, is that they're like, but I'll lose my job.
Yeah, they're like, I can't speak out because of what they'll think.
People, I love this, because I've been saying it for years. They think that as the woke mob goes door to door, kicking it in and dragging people into the street, they say, if I just don't say anything, my house will be the one they skip. They didn't skip any of the doors. They didn't skip any of the houses. No. They're going door to door after every single industry. You will get canceled, period.
Right.
The only problem is you had an opportunity to stand up and speak up, and you didn't do it. Now, I know a lot of people who watch this show probably did, because, if you're watching this, you're probably not happy with what's going on, but too many people don't. They won't, and that's it. There was a really horrifying Twitter thread from James Lindsay. Think you guys know James Lindsay?
Yeah.
He basically said it's over. They won. There's no winning this fight. The best you can do is defend yourself, don't back down, stand up for what you believe in, and hope it doesn't last that long. But it could last centuries. Yeah,
don't fight it. It's not a fight to take. You can circumvent the problem and fix it from the outside without engaging in it.
The problem is, even if you look at the American Revolution, most people, like the plurality are just scared and don't want to do anything. And that's really, really sad. It is. It's like you're watching a forest fire and there's someone saying, if you and I turn this hose on, we can make it go away. You say, but I might get burned. I'd rather back away and watch the forest burn to the ground than do anything that brings risk to myself. And yet these people reap the benefits of those who are willing to sacrifice to make the world a better place. And that is one of the biggest problems we face in this country. For the longest time, it's always been, there's that meme of, there's this beautiful, like, there's this like, I guess you can call it a cliff. There's this like loving looking couple looking onto this beautiful city. And then underneath, it's a bunch of soldiers in the dirt holding them up. It's always been those who are willing to sacrifice, who provide for those who aren't. Yeah, and that's and people need to accept responsibility for what's going on.
That word sacrifice is like muted. It's been diffused. The power of the word, what it really means to sacrifice your well-being, whether it's that you're ridiculed in public or that you have to suffer trauma by seeing someone bleed out next to you, like that's alters you forever.
It's not even that. It's that you might have to carry a rock. You might have to lift something. What's that? You got to pick up a heavy box.
Something
you don't want to do it. People would rather just lay around and be like, but it's so easy to do nothing and let evil people destroy everything. What's the saying? All that is required for evil to succeed is good men. Is that good men do nothing?
I think it's Martin Luther King, right?
I don't remember.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's older than
famous quote.
Shout out to Martin Luther King.
But here we are. That's it.
What's the answer, Luke?
I'm looking up Chomsky and seeing what he's up to, because he also a couple decades ago was very strong in favor of free speech and standing up for everyone. He has this famous quote that I just looked up that I want to share with everyone, and he said, quote, "Goebbels was in favor of free speech for views he liked. So was Stalin. If you're really in favor of free speech, then you're in favor of freedom of speech for precisely the views you despise. Otherwise, you're not in favor of free speech."
Right.
And I absolutely agree with him. And he was a major important figure that was standing up for people's individuals' liberties and speech no matter what it was. And now he wrote an article that is comparing the coup attempt being closer to the center of power than Hitler's 1923
Chomsky did?
putsch. Yes, Chomsky.
Wow.
This is Truth Out. I'm reading the article right now, and I'm still trying to get to the kind of basis I was reading when you guys were talking about. But essentially, he calls what happened a coup attempt, and he's comparing it to Hitler's rise in power.
Well,
so
I don't know what to tell you, man. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier who they don't care. Time magazine puts out an article where they're just laughing in the faces of everybody. And these regular people are like, well, I don't care. And I'm like, have you asked yourself why it is that you're working 2 minimum wage jobs to try and pay your bills? Have you asked yourself why it is that your business was shut down and you lost your job for months? Have you asked yourself why it is that you're on your knees begging the government to please cut you some scraps? And there are a lot of people who aren't doing that. Do you wonder why it is there are a lot of people who are currently getting by and doing just fine, and you're the one who is being subjugated? Could it be that it's because the other people have stood up and walked away from this and found a way to be responsible for themselves and take care of themselves, but you just keep saying, please let me lick the bottom of your shoe? Okay, you know what? I'll tell you this. You're under no obligation to lick anybody's shoe. But if you really want to, far be it from me to stop you. So I'll be out in the middle of nowhere kind of just doing my thing and talking about what I want to talk about and playing games and skateboarding and all that stuff. And if you really want to live under the boots of these people and you refuse to do anything about it, then don't expect anyone to come save you when you get evicted from your apartment. You're living in the streets. That's what's coming next. The moratorium on evictions will end soon. These people haven't paid their bills, and there's been no COVID relief. Even if Joe Biden cuts these $1,400 checks, it's not going to pay the 7 or 8 months of back rent. These people are all going to find themselves in the street, and the Democrats won't give you anything. They said they were going to give you $2,000 checks. No, I'm sorry. That was supplemental. That was only $1,400 because you already got $600, right? All right, well, that kind of makes sense. Then they said, oh, and by the way, we said everyone. We actually meant means tested. So if you make more than $50,000 a year, you'll still get evicted because your cost of living probably is higher living in New York City, and you make too much. Sorry, goodbye. The street is the place for you.
Are they measuring that $50,000 based on last year's thing? So if you're unemployed right now and you make $50,000
if you make $50,000, they start diminishing your the stimulus.
So if you're on a salary to projected to make $50,000 this year, or is it like what?
It's probably the previous year.
Are you sure? Because I swear repeatedly and over again, Biden and his whole campaign team were tweeting about, no, you elect me, $2,000 checks right away, right out the door.
I remember
That's
that.
a good point.
Did I imagine that?
No, you did not.
You didn't.
No, you paid
and
attention.
how do you say this means tested thing about 50 grand when it's like, okay, what if you live in New York and what if you live in Omaha?
My rent
the
was
cost of living.
$3,000 a month in San Francisco 4 years ago.
And so the people in New York who haven't been paying it, and the people in Chicago and LA who they can't pay it, are sitting here licking the boots of Democrats, saying, we're just gonna cross our fingers and hope this is the time they give us what we need. No, they shut your businesses down, they took your jobs away, and then they gave you nothing, and now you're gonna get kicked out and you're gonna go live on the street.
I keep thinking about this Rockefeller. I don't know enough about it to really pin this all on John D. Rockefeller, but when they kind of re-evolved the school industry in the 1920s, when they were kind of attempting the coup of the Federal Reserve and all this in 1910, 1920, they built a new school system where we raise our hands, wait for the bell. We're basically learning to be factory workers. Might have been earlier than the 20s. I don't really know the details. If any of you guys do, please fill in the gaps. But it seems like they succeeded in turning us into subservient wage slaves. And now people think going to work means misery. Like they just have I have to go to work. Well, work, you're creating work. If you pay attention to what work is in science, it's energy creation. It's measured in joules.
It's worse than that. Actually, sometimes I have a nephew and I share talks with him, and I speak to him a little bit. I try to undermine the conformity that gets imposed on folks like that in the public school system. I said, hey, the company that builds your school, if you look around at the architecture of it, it's the same company that builds the prison, and they look exactly the same. They work the same way.
There's a little kid in Chicago who was thrown into a padded room, and they locked the door and walked away because he was having a temper tantrum. They put him in solitary confinement, and then the kid just cried and then soiled his pants. That's what's going on. And you know what it is? These people in cities, they keep voting for the same thing. So I look at this data showing the hyperpolarization. The red areas get redder, the blue areas get bluer. People who live in red areas who are blue move to cities because they want to be around people who are blue. And people who live in cities who are red, they move to the countryside. They get away from the blue areas. Hyperpolarization is getting worse. And from this, you'll end up with Democrat-controlled supermajorities in places like California, where they burn the system to the ground and people keep voting for it, thinking if we just keep sticking our hand in the fire, eventually it will stop burning. That's where we're at right now. The only thing I can see on the horizon is chaos. I know people who have been out of work for months. They can't pay their bills, and they're like, I'm so angry with the Democrats. I'm like, you voted for them. Okay? Look, I get it. It's not like the Republicans are going to do anything for you. But what do you think's going to happen? They're not going to help you. It's just going to get worse. Eventually, it doesn't matter what side anyone's on. Their heads are going to figuratively explode.
Yeah, that was the punishment in my high school. It was solitary confinement from 8 to 3. They would just keep you in a room, isolated by yourself, can't talk to anyone. I actually held the record for the most suspensions and consecutive days of solitary confinement in school. But as you said, they look exactly the same. They are exactly the same like prisons. The Rockefeller thing is something important because he was instrumental in creating the modern school day, which again resembles the modern day of a factory worker with exact breaks, with exact work shifts, and the
bell ringing,
and exactly, it's just meant to teach people to rinse and repeat,
compliance.
And then homeschooling is something that's attacked, something that's looked down on, when in reality homeschooled kids are getting a far better education than those in public school. Trust me, I went to public school. There's a reason I still can't spell and mess up my words daily. It's not just the Polish, but when you compare American schools to Chinese schools, when you compare the intelligence levels of Chinese people compared to American people, we have something extremely worrisome that's going to be affecting us. And I think there's a reason people keep saying Idiocracy is becoming more and more of a documentary, because it is. And it's becoming real life.
They did a poll of young people in the U.S. and China, and they asked them what they wanted to be when they grew up. Mm-hmm. And people in the U.S. said influencers, YouTubers, Instagram, and kids in China said astronauts.
I have a little anecdote. I worked for 8 years as a mentor and tutor to inner city children in D.C., and I would help them with their math and English, but also have one-on-one sessions with them. These were kids who didn't have an adult male in their household growing up, right? It's a great program. But I remember sitting in front of the classroom one day and just sort of talking about the realism of careers and choices. I said, okay, who here is going to be what do you guys want to do? And overwhelmingly, they were all either going to be professional basketball players or professional football players. And when you have it in your mind, you're going to be a professional athlete. Suddenly, the time you spend after school doing your homework oh, that's a waste of time. You want to be on the court or practicing, et cetera, not, looking at the realism or the reality of how unlikely it is. Whereas getting a job as an accountant or some other professional is easily within reach if you just keep a few things in line.
The problem is we used to have apprenticeship. We used to have, you're a guy and you work in a factory. And your kid, let's say you're a blacksmith or whatever, your kid would watch and learn from you and then pick up the trade, and then the business would stay in the family and expand. Then we moved into the era of the massive corporation where there are mid-level jobs that you can't really hand down to your kids. Like the famous accountant brought his kid to work to learn to be an accountant. Doesn't really happen. Then life stopped becoming about your passions and what you were good at, and it became about finding some menial task to build a machine. As we hyper-specialized everything, it made less sense to have our children be an apprentice, and they went to school to work, to essentially learn to be factory workers with shifts, and the bell would ring, and they'd get up and they'd move to the next room. And that's where we're at now, where these people, a lot of these people, and I can understand this, are snapping because they find no meaning in these menial tasks. Many of these people are becoming communists, thinking that, well, someone else is doing work, I should get a piece of it. And I'll tell you what you need to do. You need to roll up your sleeves, go out in the backyard, start chopping lumber, get fire going, cook your own food, grow your own food, and just be responsible for yourself for once in your life.
But not only that, not only do the jobs that are available are they cruddy, do they suck, but there's very little of them available for the average person. And if they do have them, they usually have to be countered with social government programs like welfare, which of course companies like Amazon exploit heavily, which of course McDonald's also does as well, which actually subsidizes their workforce by American taxes. And the local workforce that actually does make a little bit of money, that is still out there. But when we look at robotics, when we look at immigration, when we look at work visas, all of this is eliminating any opportunity for economic growth and economic prosperity in this country, and there's none left.
Right. But maybe there's a plateau. Like, is everyone going to be Elon Musk?
Of course not. But when we're talking about jobs and opportunities, it used to be looked upon as something that you were proud of. Now, a lot of people hate their jobs, hate what they're doing, and they don't want to be doing it, and they're not fulfilled, whether that is because of our emotional manipulated state or whether that is because of the larger socioeconomic conditions. I think it's both of those things, and I think there might be even a third factor that we're not even considering here that we don't even know of yet. But essentially what we're seeing is a miserable class of working people that have been beat up, that have been assaulted, and have been left behind by the corporate establishment that doesn't give a damn about them.
Well, what's driving this, as you hit on it, is basically corporations leaning on Washington to allow essentially unlimited illegal labor across the border, which is cutting away a lot of those initial jobs that people might have. You say Americans don't want anymore. Okay, fine. You know what job Americans love doing that they're told to learn to do is code. And yet you have these mega corporations bending the rules every which way to get every possible H-1B visa worker in here, et cetera, which are doing two things. It's driving down the wages, and you have people at Disney World who are running the IT systems having to train their own replacements, and their own senator, Marco Rubio, doesn't do anything about it, doesn't raise an issue. And those, not only is it driving wages down, but it's also driving housing costs up, which is one of the biggest expense people have. And you can sort of see this explosion in work visas for professional jobs coming into this country, and a steady decline of the median income of middle-class Americans just going down and down and down, while at the top you have people like Bezos, et cetera, exploding. Why? Because they're exploiting this beautiful market by bringing in people who's essentially did not help create it to sort of more or less exploit them. It's essentially slave labor.
The most insidious thing about the learn to code narrative, which they still pursue when now they're talking about union jobs going, well, maybe they can learn to code.
Make solar panels.
They're telling you, when they say learn to code, they're saying compete with people who live in Poland, Romania, Ukraine, places where the cost of living is substantially lower. And the amount of money that you need to pay to somebody who works who's working out of Ukraine is very, very low relative to someone who has to live in the United States. The cost of living in the U.S., an apartment in New York City, like you said, Ian, like $3,000. That's the average cost of an apartment in New York City, I'm pretty sure. Well, now it's probably collapsed, but for a while it was. Let's say you're only renting a room. And in a three-bedroom is going to cost like $35,000 to $4,000, so you're going to be spending like $1,000, $1,200 a month. You could pay half that to someone who codes in Ukraine, and they would be getting an average wage, making $600 a month. So when these companies are outsourcing, and you mentioned H-1B visas, it's worse than that. You can just hire all digital work for any company anywhere in the world. It's that easy.
And there's a big time value of it because you want people working while you're sleeping. You need 24/7 access on your, especially for tech. You need like an Indian branch so that they can go 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
You don't. We used to just hire the night shift.
Or
It's
you
called
just
the
need people
graveyard.
to work the night shift.
Yeah, we call it the graveyard shift.
Which is, but what's making me think is that what is the Americans like the 1% wealthiest people in the world? We have been. If you have making $30,000 a year, you're in the top 1%. That's shifting now. That 1% is coming from other countries. So these people in America are swiftly becoming left behind and may find themselves in the bottom 98% if they're not already.
Regular Americans. The rich are getting richer.
Yeah, like people whose parents were totally fine. We're in the 1%. They're not now.
Well, look,
Right.
I mean, this is one of the things that
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.